All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome once again. Um, Today, we're going to be continuing what we did yesterday, what we did last week. And we started stakeholder engagement and management. But today, we're going to be looking at the key concepts of stakeholder engagement. So if you're just joining us on the masterclass holds every week. And here we'll just provide resources and tools to strengthen CSOs in key areas. And each Saturday, we'll try to bring a topic that is relevant to the work that we do. And my name is Vincent Egoro. So last week, we started stakeholder engagement, and we looked at the definitions of stakeholder engagement, on the definition of stakeholders, and we also looked at the building blocks of stakeholder engagement, and we focused on just one of the blocks, which is stakeholder identification and analysis. So here we looked at the tools that we can use for stakeholder identification, how to carry out stakeholder identification, and how to carry out stakeholder analysis. And we say that for you to do a proper stakeholder engagement, you have to move beyond. You have to move beyond analysis. You have to move beyond identifying those stakeholders, okay, to really look at the strategies of how you could actually engage with the stakeholders. Because a lot of times, what we see in the organization is that when we talk about stakeholder management or stakeholder engagement, many of us just focus on the tools to say, okay, I'm doing a Venn diagram, or I'm doing the power and interest analysis, or I'm doing a stakeholder analysis metrics, and so on. Or I've done the stakeholder table. So we just stop there after doing that. But it's important to realize that after you've identified the stakeholders and after you've mapped them out, mapped their interests and what their needs and their interests, you've known the role that they can play in your project. It's also very important to sit down and think about, how do I consult with these stakeholders? How do I engage them? I know these stakeholders. I've been able to identify the stakeholders, and I know what they want on the project. I know what capacities they are bringing on the project. I know who their representatives are on that project. So the next thing that you need to focus is, how do we actually engage them? And so that's why we say that stakeholder engagement is a broad term, is an umbrella term that encompasses a range of activities and interactions over the life of a project. Okay, beyond just analyzing, beyond just knowing your stakeholders, there are a series of activities or a series of actions that you need to take throughout the project cycle or the project life cycle, throughout the span of your project, if you want to get them actively participating. Because it's very, very important that your stakeholders are participating actively on that project. Because as you already know, projects are made for people and by people. And so if you do not have the right stakeholders participating in your project, if the critical stakeholders are not participating in the project, then that project may fail. So you need to understand, how do we engage with these stakeholders that we have identified? Just to test, can you all hear me? I just want to find out. Sorry, I forgot to do that initially, but let's just know before we proceed further. So let me just know that, let me be sure that I'm not talking alone, that there are people here who can actually hear me.
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah,
All
we
right.
can hear you, sir.
All right, thank you. Thank you. All right. So now that we've done the stakeholder analysis identification and stakeholder analysis last week, we will now want to move on to the next components of the engagement process. And we want to look at information disclosure, stakeholder consultation, negotiation and partnerships, grievance management, stakeholder involvement in project monitoring, reporting to stakeholders, and the management functions. Now, the first thing we want to look at today is information disclosure. Information disclosure on our project. So, as you can see on the screen, when we say you need to disclose information to stakeholders, we're saying that you need to make sure that the information around your project are accessible to the stakeholders, people who are interested and people who are affected. Most times, one of the things we always see in our communities is that many NGOs, many CSOs are often very willing to share information with donors, share information with other CSOs who are their partners, but they are not willing to share information with community members or the affected population on that particular project. And so you now find out that when you are not sharing information to the right stakeholders, especially the stakeholders that are affected by the problems in the communities, you would find that their participation in the project is not full. You'll find out that there is no ownership of the project by community members. You're going to be faced with a lack of community ownership. So community members are not owning the project, even if you're doing the things for them, because you've not shared information with them appropriately and at the right time. You find out that there is no high-level community participation, and also there will be no ownership of the project. So immediately your project ends and you leave that community. If you come back again, you see that the gains that were recorded on that project will now be lost because the people were not carried along. And so there's no ownership and continuity even by the community members themselves. So we like you can see on the screen, that your engagement is going to be more constructive if stakeholders, especially the people who are affected, have the accurate and timely information about the project, about its impact and other aspects of the project that may have an effect on them. And so it's very important that we as part of our stakeholder engagement process, we think about how are we going to be sharing information with the communities? What amount of information should we disclose to our stakeholders? And so in order for you to carry out information disclosure, one, you need to be transparent. It's very important that you are transparent. Transparency is key, that you must give people the information they need to participate in your project in an informed manner. So it's very critical. If people view you, if community members view you as being secretive, okay, as not wanting to share information, you're going to lose the public trust. Because many of us, the reason why we are still working in the communities where we are working is simply because the people trust us. And when you do not share information with people, it's going to create a distrust with the communities. And that's something that you want to avoid. You really do not want to have a situation where the communities do not trust you. Then your projects are going to fail if community members do not trust you. And in order for you to be to carry out proper information disclosure, it's important that you disclose information early. Early. Carry people along from the beginning of the project. There are certain people that need to be informed, carried along from the beginning of the project. There are certain stakeholders that you must carry along at the beginning of a project. And there are some that you're going to be carrying along. You're going to be informing them during the planning, during the implementation, and even during the closeout stages. So it's always very important that you inform people early on in the project. Some of us would want people to, let me give you an instance. Say an NGO wants people to attend an event that they are planning, a partners meeting that they are planning, and then you're now sharing information about the partners meeting, maybe 24 hours or 48 hours to the event, and you expect people to turn up simply because they are your sub-grantees or they are the CBOs that are working in that project. It is wrong. You must share information early and give people adequate time to plan to attend those events. And it's also very important that you inform people about the next steps. Okay, if there have been any cancellation to events, if there have been any changes that have been made on the project, it's also very important to share that information with them. And that's why we talked about, in project management, we talked about the project charter, that the project charter is a document whereby you share project information with stakeholders, especially the stakeholders who may not see the original project documents. So it's very important that you share and disclose this information early enough with them. Now, when you're disclosing information, the second thing you need to consider is that you need to disclose objective information. Many of us always exaggerate. You should learn not to exaggerate in project information. Always tell it like it is. Remove exaggerations. Don't go and share figures that are not accurate on a project, especially when you're sharing good news. Refrain from exaggerating the good news. Okay, if for instance you're saying there are employment opportunities for community members who are working on that project, let them know the number of persons that you can take. Okay, if for instance you could tell them, okay, at present we estimate we are able to take 20 volunteers from the communities. Okay, don't go and say, okay, as you're cooperating with us now, we believe that there's going to be so much employment opportunities for you, or so many of you will become volunteers in these communities. You go and raise beneficiary or stakeholder expectation. It's very important that when you're disclosing information to stakeholders, you disclose only objective information. Be open about the project, but tell it as it is. Don't go and add, don't misinform people. Don't raise their expectation by making them to feel that there are more benefits beyond what they stand to get on that project. And the next thing you also want to consider when you're carrying out information disclosure is to design disclosure to support consultation. Always give people the information they need to participate in an informed manner. It's critical. Don't expect that stakeholders that are just hearing about or seeing the project for the first time will be immediately ready to make decisions about what they want or how they are going to participate. Allow time, inform people and allow them time to make a decision about the project, whether they want to participate with you or not. Don't corner people. Don't put them in a box and say, okay, we don't have time, just come and sign, just come and sign. Allow people time to go and consider. Allow people time to think about to think things through before they are involved in your project. When you share information, always give sufficient time, okay? Always give sufficient time for people to think about the issues that you're bringing, about the information that you're sharing, about the benefits that they stand to get on the project before they participate fully. Don't rush people. And the next consideration you have to make, put in place when you're thinking about information disclosure is you need to provide meaningful information in a manner and language that is readily understandable and tailored to the target stakeholder group. Now, many of us work in rural communities. So it's you know that in these communities, we have a lot of people, we have population who cannot read, who are not literate. So it's always important that when you're sharing information with people, you share it in the format and language that is readily understandable and tailored to them. It's not everybody that you will be communicating in English. Sometimes you may need to communicate in rural, in local languages. So you may want to translate the information into the language. Some people, you may need to speak with them in Pidgin English. So you may want to translate that into Pidgin English. So when you're disclosing information, you need to consider that this information is going to be meaningful. How will it be meaningful? By presenting it in the format and language that is readily understandable by the people. So you can come to a local community and you're now speaking Queen's English and you expect them to understand. It's not possible. So what you're going to be doing is to share that information, maybe in their local languages or dialects, or you translate it into the Pidgin English if they are able to understand. I've been to communities where people still cannot speak Pidgin English. And if you're unable to speak their local language, you're going to need an interpreter to interpret. So those are the things that you are going to consider when sharing or disclosing information about your project. The next thing that you need to consider when disclosing information about your project to stakeholders is that you need to ensure the accessibility of the information. So here, think about how will these people receive and comprehend this information? What would be the best method of sharing this information? For instance, if your stakeholders are community members, it may be more reasonable for you to disclose information to community members that you're doing maybe public meetings, or you're having a focus group discussion with them, okay? Or you're asking them to give you their representatives, and you share this information with them through their representatives for the representatives to go and share. Don't just feel that because we've pasted a flyer or we've printed posters and we pasted it there, the people have heard it. You must think about this information that I want to share. How can I make it more accessible to the persons themselves who would require this information? How can I get this information across to the real people who will need this information? And in sharing information, it's also important that you weigh the risks and benefits of that information. Because some of the project information are sensitive. Now, just because we say that you need to disclose information about your project to stakeholders does not mean that you would now go and disclose even sensitive information, or especially information regarding the data of people. So with regards to information that you want to share, it's always important that you think about what are the risks of sharing this information. These stakeholders that I want to share this information with, are they able to comprehend it? Are they able to handle this information? Will they be able to manage this information, or they will not be able to manage this information? So it's very important that you think about it to say, these stakeholders, will they be able to manage this information that we want to share with them? So it's not everybody that has the capacity to be able to handle certain information. So it's critical that you think about them, you think about the various stakeholders that you have, and think about, will these people, what are the risks of sharing this information to the public? What are the risks of sharing this information to this class of stakeholders? Okay, there are some information that you may not want to disclose, that may have non-disclosure, maybe information that has to do with the confidentiality of the parties. So, and some information will have to do with propriety. It has to do with personal privacy, personal safety, information around security. It's not possible for you to share, because there are some information that you disclose, maybe regarding your beneficiaries. You now endanger them. You endanger them to the public. I'll give you an instance. When the US were leaving Afghanistan, you see that they were burning and destroying a lot of data. They were destroying even the identities of their interpreters, because they couldn't reveal the identities of those interpreters, people who were interpreting for them, so that the Taliban would not go after these individuals. So you cannot share, just because we say that you must be open, you must be transparent, and you must be willing to share information about your projects, about your organization to stakeholders. There are some information that have to be strictly confidential, and they may be on a need-to-know basis. So it's not every information that you need to share. Some of them are risky. You endanger the people more when you share them. And so the next thing you need to consider is that you need to manage information on sensitive and controversial issues. There are certain stakeholder issues that may be particularly sensitive and thus carry risks to the organization if you share those kind of information to other parties. Some of us are working on sensitive projects, okay? Sensitive projects that have to do with the health situation of people. You cannot go. Imagine, for instance, you're working on a project that has to do with maybe HIV, AIDS, tuberculosis, or even COVID-19. Remember we're talking about, remember when COVID-19 came, government was just telling us about the number of people affected, but they were never revealing the identities of these persons because of the stigma and the backlash that they may find. Even in some humanitarian projects, you cannot reveal certain information about your beneficiary list to other stakeholders. There are some projects that you do maybe around even mental health. You cannot go and publish data about the number of people that you've treated in this particular community who are affected by mental health, and you go to social media and you're disclosing these numbers and maybe the images of these persons, these individuals on social media. It is wrong. It is unethical. And because that information is sensitive and it may become very controversial if you do so. Now, do we have anybody with an example who want to share, or you have any question regarding this particular step on stakeholder engagement, whereby you are disclosing information about your project to stakeholders? You can just raise your hand if you want to share, and I'll unmute you. Or you can type your question on the chat if you have any question. You want to ask a question regarding this, how to engage your stakeholders through information disclosure. Okay, Moses, go ahead.
Hello, sir, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, I can hear you.
Okay, so my question is this: what if in a situation you want to engage your stakeholders in a way of trying to get funds from them, and you try to use the statistic of what you have done and what you're about to accomplish and solicit for fund? You see, advisable to use the picture of the past event you have done in order to get their attention?
Okay, thank you so much, Moses. There have been instances whereby if you're trying to publish materials, especially, let's say, for instance, because we just celebrated the mental health day. If, for instance, you're working on a project that has to do with the mental health, and then you want to publish, it will be insensitive of you to publish pictures of people who are affected by mental health. Mental health still has a lot of stigma. So we have seen instances whereby people, even television channels, will blur the faces of those people, or they will use a black something to just write off, to mask off the face or the eyes of the individual so that you will not be able to identify them. So in that instance, you could talk about the number of persons you've reached, but in terms of sharing the pictures, in these cases, please, whenever you're collecting pictures, especially of community members, there's what we call a consent form. They should be able to have signed a consent form to you, giving you the consent. They are giving you their consent to say you can share their information on, on your materials and use them to publish and so on. But even at that, even when they give you consent, you also still need to protect their identity, especially in projects that have to do with very sensitive and has a lot of stigma and cultural biases around them. So that's just my advice. You could talk about the number of persons you reach, the data, number of women, number of men, and so on. But revealing their identities, you have to also be careful, except it's a project whereby it's not sensitive. Remember, I said always weigh the risks, and manage information on sensitive issues. So because these things can lead to divorce, it can lead to even death. When somebody just see that they publish their image and say, you have mental health issues. Some employers will still sack you, because you have mental health issues. Or for me, I'm using mental health as just an example. So the same with HIV/AIDS, the same with tuberculosis, even COVID-19. It's very important that we try to protect our beneficiaries. Thank you. So, Mrs. Hindi, Mrs. Menkiti, please go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Vincent.
Good morning, madam.
And everybody. Thank you very much for this training today. I think this is a very key aspect of program implementation, especially me. My area of intervention mostly is HIV.
Yeah.
And also there's another sensitive issue that is in trend now, the issue of GBV.
Yeah.
And I can see a lot of things happening in the social media whereby they will be disclosing people victims of GBV on the internet and social media, which is very wrong.
Yeah.
We had an incident some years ago when we started our project on HIV.
Yeah.
So it happens that we had an issue with one of our member. So Saka was there. They were involved. So we had an interview and some training and some discussion.
Yeah.
Before we know it, the next thing is it was all over the person that demanded the interview. It was all over the media and all over the print media, and then the what do you call it, radio and television. Not knowing the man was at home. The people just started calling him. His family saw it on the news, and the issues become a serious matter in the state. Wow. And as of then, the HIV anti-stigma bill and other things has not been passed in the state. It was really a scandal in the state that SACA had to pay a lot of damage control. So disclosing somebody's identity without his consent, and especially protecting somebody's not even disclosing, it is the person needs protection.
Yeah.
So we had a serious issue with that SACA they were taken to court, SACA Kebbi State. They were taken to court for that issue because they just aired it without even, he didn't even know. And they didn't even tell us that. Even we didn't know, we would have intervened before because we know the implication. But before we know, they just went and started publicizing it. And the next thing, all over the town, people were, this person has HIV, this. And then that was like 15 years back when the stigma was at its peak. And he's a public figure and all those things. And another woman also the same thing. That one also, it was not even personal, but it was on the media. They aired the program on the news. So she was working with one bank, and they saw her on the media that she was part of that. The next week when she entered, they just sacked her from her job. They just received a dismissal, or what do you call it, related
Yeah,
to
yeah.
disengagement letter. So it was another issue. So we had to enter into a lot of engagement with the stakeholder and we started sensitizing people and creating more awareness. And thank God, immediately that day, that was when the anti-stigma bill was now passed at the national level. So we had to come back and start campaigning and advocate so that they would now domesticate it in there. So thank God, because of those two incidences, we were able to succeed so that they would domesticate that law, that bill
Yeah.
in the state. So since from that time, at least the tension has reduced. But recently now the issue of GBV has become another different issue now. It's like it's out of control because the case is rampant almost on a daily basis. And sometimes they are just small children underage, and they will just start airing them and started showing their pictures. So we have really been campaigning and stopping all those people from sending all those pictures. It is really a key information that every partner, every implementing partner need to know that it's not all about publicizing info, but protecting that person's image and
Yeah.
even for security. Some families, there are instances we have also some years ago that the family even I think they killed the person, or they took the person away and went and kept him hiding so that their own family, they should their image and their integrity should be protected. So many incidents, so many people died because of as a result of that. So many women also were divorced also as a result of that.
Okay.
That is why even in HIV, the issue of even confidentiality, it had reached to the extent that if you're HIV positive and you are tested, it is only when you consented that they should tell you, even if it is your husband or your closer relative. If you didn't say disclose it, yeah, you disclose it, is a crime.
Yeah, yeah.
That is the essence. So if person say don't disclose, or he did not give consent for you to disclose it, not even picture or anything, to tell another person. In health sector, you're not even allowed to tell somebody, even the closest relation, if it is not a time, maybe it's a what do you call it, timely, they did something that has to do with
Yeah.
death. That person maybe has a short time to live. You're not allowed to disclose somebody's confidential issues or health matter to anybody. So that's just my little contribution. Thank you.
Thank you so much, madam. Thank you. All right. Gloria, you can unmute, and then Madam Menkiti will now talk. Gloria.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hello. So, good morning, all.
Yeah, good morning.
So my question is on. Okay, my question is stakeholder engagement and gender. So
Yeah.
now there are communities where the key stakeholders are men,
Yeah.
and then in information disclosure, I think both gender is important that they partake in the exercise. So now, how do we close this gap of stakeholder engagement and balancing the gender in the community?
All right, thank you. So we do have a section where I'm going to talk about how to consult, bringing gender into your stakeholder engagement, especially when you're consulting, doing the consultation. So when I talk about that, that should answer your question. I'm going to talk about that shortly when I move into stakeholder consultation. How do you consult them? So how do you consult the women? How do you consult the men? Because you don't want to just go and just assume that simply because you've informed the men, you've now also informed the women. So I'm going to talk about that in the stakeholder consultation section. All right, so Mrs. Menkiti, okay, yeah, go ahead, please. Madam Menkiti, you can unmute yourself. Your hand was up. Okay. Okay.
Okay. I was just trying to share,
Yeah.
our own experience on the importance of, disclosure.
Yes.
Many years ago, in the early days of HIV, we needed to let people hear about HIV and how those who were living with HIV were managing their lives. It was
Yeah.
called the Diary of Persons Living with HIV and AIDS.
Okay.
We brought those living with HIV and AIDS to tell their stories, but we ensured that their voices were muffled so that
Okay.
people would not recognize their voices. So
Okay.
that's what we did at that time. I just wanted to share that.
Okay. That's fantastic. That's
Yeah,
fantastic.
it was very critical for them. They agreed to share their story. It was Pat DFID that supported the project. They agreed to share their story on the grounds that we muffle their voices so people will
Yeah.
not know. But it was important to let people know that there are really human beings living with HIV and how they had been managing their lives. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you. So we've now seen examples about how each of us, some of us have been able to disclose sensitive information, especially sensitive information around your stakeholders. So if you're just joining, we're looking at stakeholder engagement, key concepts that you can use to manage your stakeholders. We first of all, last week we started it last week, and last week we're looking at definitions of who a stakeholder is, what stakeholder management is, and then we went on to look at the first step of stakeholder engagement, which is stakeholder identification and analysis. And then today we are looking at information disclosure. And we're saying that in order for you to disclose information, you've got to be transparent, and you need to disclose this information early. You need to disclose only objective information, don't exaggerate. And then you need to design your disclosure to support consultation. And you need to provide meaningful information. You need to ensure accessibility of information. You need to always weigh the risk and benefits, and you need to manage information when it comes to sensitive and controversial issues, which is where we were on, and some examples were shared around how they've been able to manage sensitive information. Now, the next thing that I want to look at is stakeholder consultation. How do you consult with your stakeholders? So we're saying that consultation is a two-way process of dialogue between either a project company, a project organization, a CSO, and an NGO, and its stakeholders. So stakeholder consultation, here all you're doing is that you are initiating and sustaining your relationship and partnerships with people over time. You really want to engage with people, because if you do not consult with people and if you do not get their feedback, you may not achieve any success on the project. So stakeholder consultation is very, very critical to the success of your project, because you're working with people, you need to get their buy-in if you have to go ahead on that project. And in order for you to properly consult, there are 5 steps that you need to follow. Why we call it iterative is that you don't just, consultation is not something that you just go and say, okay, let's go and consult with clan head, and you just move and say, okay, we'll discuss with clan head, that's it, final. You find out that even when you've discussed with the clan head, as you go to implement your project, there may be some issues, and the clan head or the community chief or the women leader or the imam or the youth or whoever is that stakeholder may have a change of heart. So we said consultation is something that is repetitive, it's iterative. It's not something that is done once and for all, or just a one-time thing. No, it has to be something that is ongoing, something that is done continuously. So in order for you to consult, the first thing that you need to do is you need to plan ahead. Early on in the project, you need to think about who are the people that we're going to be consulting with. These people, what are we going to be consulting with them about? Why are we consulting with them? It's very important that you know this so that you can manage costs. You can also manage stakeholder expectation. So it's critical that you plan ahead. Don't just wake up without any plan. You say, let's go to this community and go and consult with them. You've not informed them. You don't even know who you're going there to meet. You don't know who are the gatekeepers in that community. You don't know anything about that information about the community. You just wake up with your team and say, we've come to consult you. You may even be insulting the people in the process, because these are stakeholders, some of them, for those of you who are working with government, you understand that government has protocols. There are protocols. You don't just wake up and say, I'm going to see the Commissioner of Health, or I'm going to see the Commissioner of Youth and Sport. Even if that commissioner is your brother, there is a protocol that comes with that office that you must follow. So if you don't plan ahead, you find out that you are not going to be able to consult properly. So in order for you to, when planning, you need to look at what is the purpose of this consultation? What is the purpose of this consultation? Okay, this person wants to go and see, what are we going to be seeing them for? What are the objectives of this our consultation? You know, so if you don't know what you're going to be consulting them for, you go there and you'll be very unprepared, and you may now even embarrass yourself. The next thing that you want to do when planning for consultation is to think about the requirements. So here you're looking at, are there any regulatory requirements that we must follow? Are there any protocols or policies that we must apply if we want to go and consult with these people? And then you need to think about the stakeholders. So here you'll be asking yourself, who are the key stakeholder groups that need to be consulted during this phase of the project? What are some of the issues that they will wish to discuss with us? What are their interests and why? You may have known their interests when you did the analysis, but you also need to anticipate so that people will not ambush you and make certain demands that you're not prepared for. So you need to think about what would be the likely things that they will desire. What are some of the things that they may be expecting from us as we go on these consultations with them? Another consideration when you're planning for your stakeholder consultation is to think about scoping of priority issues. So here you'll be asking yourself, are there any high-risk groups or issues requiring special attention at this stage? Are there vulnerable groups in the project area or topics that are particularly sensitive or controversial? So this will enable you to be able to tailor your consultation to meet specific needs, so that when you're going to consult the people, you know that you're not leaving any vulnerable groups behind. Somebody asks about gender. You need to be able to think about what are the issues around gender, what are the needs of the women, of the other vulnerable groups, so that when we go to consult the communities, we can raise these things up. And then you need to think about the techniques. What method or tool will be most effective in communicating with the different stakeholder groups? You know, at the community level, you may need to use traditional or customary means, okay, of communicating with them. You may want to use participatory methods where they are also involved in the decision-making process while you're consulting them. Then you need to think about responsibilities. Who within the company or the organization will be responsible for what activities? For us as CSOs, you'll be thinking who within the CSO is going to be responsible for what? So you need to think about the roles and responsibilities of every of your team members when you go out for consultation. What will our team be doing? What will they be saying? Who will be in charge of what activity? That's what you'll be doing. You have to determine roles and responsibilities of your staff and your volunteers before you actually go to consult. And then you need to document. These are all things that you need to do around when you're planning for consulting with your stakeholders. How will you capture the results? How will you capture the process? How will you record? How will you track the consultation? And how will you disseminate information regarding that consultation visit that you had with your stakeholders? And so it's very important that you plan ahead. Always plan for consultation. Don't just wake up. And some of these things may have budgetary implications. So you think about the budget as well. Okay, what budget are we going to allocate for each of these consultations that we're going to be having with our stakeholders? And the next thing we want to focus on is that you need to consult using principles of good practice. There is no one specific way. There is no one ultimate way of consulting with your stakeholders. It all depends on the context where we find ourselves, the location where we find ourselves. The way you will consult in the South may be different from the way you consult with stakeholders in the North. So you want to really think about what are the best practice in carrying out consultation. So we're saying that consultation would always be context specific. The methods, the approach, the duration, the timetable that you're going to be used would have to be tailored to the situation where you find yourself, the area that you find yourself, the area where you're working in. Don't think that the way we consult in the South, if you're in the South, maybe you're in Lagos or you're in any of the states in the South attending this meeting, the way you would consult is not the way that people in the North are going to be consulting their stakeholders. But most importantly, consultation should be targeted at those who are likely to be affected by the project. So it's very important that you target people who are affected by the project. You need to also consult with beneficiaries or the affected population. Your consultation should be early enough. It's very, very important that you carry out consultation early, and so that you are going to get identify the issues that affect people and how decisions are going to be made on that project. So your consultation should also be informed. Okay, it should be well informed. Your consultation should be meaningful to the people who you are consulting. If it is not meaningful to them, they are not going to participate in a way. And then you need to also understand that consultation is a two-way thing, okay? So as you're going to consult them, it's not a top-down decision. You are not going to dictate to them what to do. You must allow them to also share their own opinions and their feedback regarding what they think about certain issues. And then your consultation should be gender inclusive. You need to have a thorough awareness that men and women often have differing views and needs. The needs of men, the needs of women are different. And you need to localize your consultation based on the context. Your consultation should also be free from manipulation or coercion. You don't go and force people to take decisions. You don't go and force people to participate in the project. You don't go and blackmail them or you coerce them that they must participate in this project with you. No, it's not done. And then consultation should be documented. There has to be documentation. Like I always told you, if you've been following all our teachings on this platform, we talk about the importance of documentation. There has to be evidence. You should be able to document the things that you've done. You should be able to keep track of who has been consulted and what are the issues that these persons that were consulted raised. And you should be able to report back in a timely way to those who you consulted and also clarify to them what decisions have been taken. And consultation is not something that is done, it's not a one-time thing. It's something that is ongoing. Consultation is ongoing. It's not something that you do once and for all. That's why we say that it is iterative. Now, the third step in consulting is that you need to incorporate feedback. You need to incorporate feedback. So we said here that consulting people entails a promise that at a minimum, their views will be considered during the decision process. So you don't just go to communities or to stakeholders and get their views when you're planning the project, and then you do not share with them whether their views were actually implemented. So there has to be that procedure whereby you are providing feedback to the committee members or to the other stakeholders about what has been done regarding the ideas or the views that they shared when you were consulting with them on the project. And the fourth step in consulting is you need to document the process and results of consultation. So it's very important that you keep a log of stakeholder consultation. You need to look at having a log, a register, whereby you are documenting when stakeholder consultations are taking place, who are the people who you consulted with, what are the topics that you discussed, what are the decisions that were reached as a result of the consultations, what are the action plans that you have. So you can develop a table that will enable you to answer these key questions that I've just read out now, that you to answer, okay, who do we consult? Where did we consult the person? How, in terms of what method did we use in consulting them? What topic did we discuss? What are the results? And what are the next steps? So that allows you to take charge of your consultation. And the next step that I want to talk about is report. So there have been times where communities are frustrated that CSOs will just show up in their doorsteps to come and consult with them on the issue, and they will not hear from them again. Okay, so maybe the only time you're consulting with your community members is when you're collecting data about project information. You go to them to gather data, and they don't hear from you again around whether you actually use the information that you collected from them on the project and if it actually worked or not. So it's very important that when you're consulting with stakeholders, you report back to them. It's very, very important that you report back to the stakeholders that you've consulted. Now, in order for you to carry out consultation, there are techniques that you can use for appropriate consultation. There are techniques that you can use for appropriate consultation. But before we talk about the techniques that you can use, you also need to consider gender. You need to have gender considerations when you are consulting. When you're going on into consultation, think about gender. I know you need to understand that men and women are affected differently. And in some of our societies, men and women play different roles. There are certain roles that have been prescribed for men. There are certain roles that have been prescribed for women in our societies. And so when you're consulting in communities and in the society, it's important for you to think about gender. And one way to think about this is you need to always try to get the full picture. Women have their own priorities, have their own needs in the communities. They have their own perspectives about key issues. So it's important that you think about, how does this project or this issue affect men? How does it affect women. So you always try to seek the views of women. Always try to seek the views of women, not only the views of men. Try as much as possible to seek the views of women separately. Another thing that you need to do is that you also need to disaggregate your data. So it's very important that you disaggregate your data, the data that you're collecting. Let us know the data that you collected around women, and let us know the data that you collected around men. So that's very critical, because a lot of times I've seen situations whereby you're going to communities to consult them and women are not there. And it's your duty to ensure that more women are brought into the room to discuss. So you need to deliberately go out of your way to get women to participate in the project, because women will not participate when men are there. Women are not going to talk when men are there. Our society is it has a lot of patriarchy in it. And so you must go out of your way to ensure that women participate, either by holding separate meetings for women and then separate meetings for men. And you also need to ensure that even your team that you're going to use, the team, maybe your project team and volunteers that you're going to use to communities, you need to actively ensure that there are more women in your team who are going to communities, because there is no way a man would go to a community and you want to go and interview women and you feel that the women will open up to you. So if you want to talk with women, it is safe, whether you are in the north of the country or in the south of the country, it's safe for you to, it's safer, and you get more information if you allow women to attend to women. Women within your team to go and discuss with women or to have meetings with women, and because women will be freer and more willing to discuss with women than to discuss with men around certain issues that affect them. Now, there are techniques that you can use for consultation. So let's look at a matrix of consultation techniques. So one of the techniques that you can use for consultation is personal interviews. And you will use personal interviews when you're trying to identify specific issues that affect a particular stakeholder, when you're trying to provide opportunities for stakeholders to speak confidently, when you're trying to build relationships with individual stakeholders, so you can go one-on-one basis. Now, what are the advantages of using personal interviews? One, it demonstrates commitment on the part of the company or the organization. It provides an opportunity for to build a relationship with that individual, and also provides detailed data through two-way communication. But the disadvantage is that personal interviews, consume a lot of time and resources, especially when you have a lot of stakeholders that you want to interact with. If you want to go with them one-on-one, it's more time consuming, and it's also going to cost you more. And there will be no opportunity to test the attitudes and assertions independently. And then individuals may not necessarily be representative of a stakeholder group as a whole. So sometimes the person that you're discussing with may not be the individual whom the stakeholders are interested in talking with. And so that becomes a problem. That becomes a problem for you if you do not consult the right stakeholder. If you just see somebody and you just go to discuss with them, what if they are not the right stakeholders for that particular community or that particular group whom you want to discuss with? Now, the next technique that you want to use is workshop. So you use workshops when you're trying to seek formal relationships with and between high-level stakeholders and experts. So you're going to create like stakeholder workshops where you're bringing them together in a room, and you take them maybe to a hotel and you're bringing them together. So maybe it's where you're bringing maybe the EDs of organizations or senior members of communities or other NGO partners that you're bringing them. You're creating like a stakeholder workshop where you're discussing with them. And so You also do workshops when you're trying to involve stakeholders in brainstorming, when you're trying to develop a strategic approach or to resolve an issue. You also do workshops with stakeholders when you're trying to communicate aspects of the project process or issue management to stakeholders, when you're trying to analyze impact, when you're trying to prioritize or rank issues and find potential solutions to the problems you're facing. So you organize stakeholder workshops. Now, what are the advantages and disadvantages of organizing stakeholder workshops? One, the advantage is that it demonstrates commitment on your part as a CSO or as an NGO. It also provides an opportunity to build a network of relationships. When you come together, imagine that this training was a physical one. There's an opportunity for you to interact more with each other. During the breakout sessions, you're going to get to know each other better. And then another advantage is that it allows issues to be verified, to be tested, and for solutions to be developed. And it also increases ownerships by participants, because whenever an NGO, maybe a partner, carries out a stakeholder workshop and they call you to deliberate, to brainstorm about potential solutions, potential strategies that the project is going to use to be implemented, there's a lot of ownership because you feel that you are part of the people that develop the strategy, that develop the plan that the project now use. But the disadvantage is that participation is limited to a relatively small number of stakeholders. Even no matter how much money you have as an NGO, you cannot bring everybody to maybe a hotel, for instance, or to a particular venue to now go and brainstorm, okay? That's why you see that for many NGOs that are working with large stakeholders, they limit participation. They will tell you that, okay, we're only going to, maybe every CSO should bring one person or every CSO should bring 2 people. So because of that limited participation, the number of stakeholders that you'll be interacting with are going to be small. And then sometimes individuals may not necessarily be representative of a stakeholder group as a whole. And there are times where by the persons that represent stakeholders are not qualified to be there, in that they do not make the right contribution. So I've attended meetings whereby invitations will be sent to executive directors or CEOs of organizations, and then they will send a staff. Maybe the staff is not even a member of the senior management team, and the staff will come there, and the staff is not making any meaningful contribution, for that particular organization. So that organization will be losing out, because the kind of representation that they brought is not doing them justice. And sometimes, with regard to stakeholder workshops, you will need to provide sufficient information to enable participants to provide informed views. And so when you provide an agenda and you do not provide detail with regards to that agenda, you see that your stakeholders may not provide any reasonable view on that project at that particular time. Now, another technique that you can use is focus groups. Focus groups, you use focus groups as part of your consultation technique when you're trying to identify stakeholder views on a specific issue, when you're trying to discuss the views of a common interest stakeholder group, when you're trying to gather baseline data, when you're trying to support pilot tests or gain feedback on outputs of other methods, when you're trying to determine stakeholder responses to proposed mitigation or social investment strategies, when you're trying to monitor and evaluate the performance of a project, you can do a focus group discussion with your stakeholders. The advantage is that focus group discussion demonstrates commitment on part of the CSO. It shows people that you are committed. When you bring people, a cross-section of people together for them to share, it shows your commitment. It also provides you it provides an opportunity to build a network. It provides an opportunity to build a network of solutions. I think I've missed this. Let me just hold on. Let me, this is not, I didn't change this, so let me just bring it back. Oh, just a moment. Okay. Just a moment. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so apologies. It was the right one. Okay, so I said focus group discussions, the advantages include that it allows issues to be verified, tested, and solutions developed. It also increases ownership by participants because you're bringing a cross-section that represents the group of stakeholders that you're working with, or your organization is working with on that particular project. Now, the disadvantage also, just the same way with the workshop, focus group discussions limit the number of stakeholders that can participate, and then individuals may not necessarily be representative of a stakeholder group or a community as a whole, and they will need to provide sufficient information. You will need to provide sufficient information such that participants can provide informed views. And if you do not have the right facilitator to facilitate a focus group discussion, you see that some persons will just dominate the discussion and others will not be sharing any information in that particular forum. We also have public or town hall meetings. So you carry out a town hall meeting when you're trying to reach large audience in particular communities quickly, when you're trying to present information and seek feedback from stakeholders, when you're trying to ensure that everyone gets a chance to provide comments, observations, or criticisms. Now, what are the advantages and disadvantages of using town hall meetings for consultation? The advantage is that, one, they are relatively inexpensive and quick. They allow you to reach a large number of people simultaneously. They demonstrate willingness for you as an organization to be open, and they provide communities with opportunity to speak directly with CSO representatives. And then the disadvantage is that there's a risk that vocal but unrepresentative groups may hijack the meeting. There have been times where some people could just cause confusion in that hall. People who are very outspoken, people who are very vocal can just hijack the situation, and the real people that are affected by the situation may not be able to speak up. And then some communities or groups within them may not be comfortable in speaking in such a public forum. There are people who would rather air their views privately than come publicly to speak. And then there is limited opportunity to explore issues of particular stakeholders in detail, and it can be difficult to facilitate if the issues under discussion is controversial or highly emotive. So we saw when one of the town hall meetings that were done between the farmers and headers, it was very explosive, okay? And sometimes it gets so rowdy. There are times where lawmakers have these public hearings, town hall meetings, when they are consulting the public about some bills that they want to pass. Okay, sometimes the arguments are the sessions are so rowdy, and it becomes very explosive, especially when it comes to issues that are very controversial or people get so emotional around those particular topics. Another way you can consult with stakeholders is through surveys. So we say you will use surveys when you're trying to identify stakeholder issues and assess community needs, when you're trying to obtain an objective overview of a group of stakeholders to a particular issue or potential impact, when you're trying to develop mitigation or social investment strategies, when you're trying to gather data for the evaluation of your indicators, when you're trying to monitor the social impacts, or you're trying to measure the impact of a project in terms of the social impact, the economic impact, or the performance of a particular project, you would use surveys. And the advantages include that surveys helps you provide detailed data on specific issues. And, assuming an appropriate sample is gathered, it provides good insight to the extent an issue is significant within a community. So you'll be able to know whether this issue is really significant to the community. And then surveys are widely known, they are acceptable, particularly in developed countries. Even in Nigeria, surveys are widely accepted and they are easy to use. The disadvantage is that written surveys are not appropriate in an environment where literacy levels are low. So in most of our rural communities where people cannot read, it may be difficult to carry out surveys. And surveys can be easily manipulated or designed to use particular results. And depending on the response method, surveys can yield poor response rates. So look at even when you do a Google, you use Google form and share, even within people that are literate, even as like a test, a pre-test or a post-test, people hardly go there to fill the surveys. Or maybe you create a poll. We've tested creating polls on what topics we should share next on the masterclass, but not many people were willing to take that poll. So those are the disadvantages of using surveys. Now, before we go to negotiation, I would just like to pause here and allow us to share if there's any questions, any comments, any observations that you want to make on this particular topic of stakeholder consultation. You could raise your hand and I would unmute you, then you speak. Is there any questions? Anybody with any question, any comments I want to make? Any observation regarding what we've talked about? Yeah, Moses, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. I must confess you are doing a very nice job. I must commend you very much. I'm very much excited to be part of this. I have a question.
Okay, what's the question?
Considering the public or town hall meeting,
yeah,
in most of this section try to bring these people together and having this public or town hall meeting seems to be one of the things that associate the ideas. But there is one advantage you mentioned of which I need a way to copy it, a way to control it, in the sense of people being afraid to view their opinion publicly. How do we go about it? Is it advisable to try to go under a private visitation, or we just consider it as majority goes with the winning, or what? Please.
Okay, sorry, I didn't really hear your question, but you said there was one advantage. There's one advantage.
Yes.
Which of them? Yeah.
One, you said about the public or town hall meeting.
Yes. I'm opening it now.
Okay. Yeah. So we need to not become comfortable speaking in such a public forum.
Okay, so you said,
It's a
okay, okay, some community or group may not be comfortable speaking in the public. Okay, so what's your question?
My question is, how do we get in touch with these people's view? Is it advisable to go on a private visitation, meet those ones on one-on-one, and how do you intend to identify those people? Because mostly, those ones that might not voice their opinion might be the ones that I say what would be helpful to such consultation.
Okay, okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so like we all know, we talked about in project management, when you're collecting data, we said do not rely on one method of data collection alone. Consultation, remember, is a two-way thing. So if you hold a public forum and you understand that maybe the forum, the town hall hearing has been hijacked, and the information that you're trying to get, you're not really getting it. You need to think about what other method can we use to validate the information that we could get. So you could decide to do a focus group of maybe that section of people that did not really speak, that were not speaking, or you could want to do a survey, or you could want to do a private meeting or with them if you feel that your projects have those resources to do that. But whenever one method, it's not always advisable that you use one method of data collection. So what I'm just showing you now are just some techniques you could use. So, but depending on the resources that you have, you could combine methods. Ideally, when you're collecting data, it's very important that you don't rely on just one method of data collection. So in this case, Moses, it's advisable that you think about another method that you can use or another technique that you can use to validate this data that you've gotten from these persons, to validate the data that you've gotten from that town hall meeting, especially where you feel that it was hijacked and some persons are not able to speak or were not given the opportunity to speak on that meeting that you conducted. So it is advisable that you use another method that you feel will be suitable and enable you to get the information that you want to get on the project. Okay, so Mr. Duke is out. Is out of the session. All right, so is there any other person with a question? Any other question, any other comments, any other observation? Okay, so we'll just move on. All right, so the next thing that I want to talk about is negotiation and partnerships. Negotiation and partnerships. Negotiation and partnerships. So now negotiation is almost as, on the surface, negotiation looks like consultation. They are related, but they are different. So we're saying that negotiation and consultation are different but related. Because while consultations tend to be more open-ended with the intent of exchanging views and information, negotiation intends to reach agreement on a specific issue. So one of the things that you need to realize, yeah, okay, so thank you so much, Eli. You said where some participants are not comfortable to speak in public, the key informant interview can be employed. Absolutely, that's why I said that you need to triangulate. You need to use more than one method of data collection, because some methods would work, some may not work for you. Now, negotiation is important. Hello? All right, so we're saying that negotiation is important because as you're going to see these stakeholders, there are times where you'll be needing some things from them. There are times where stakeholders are going to disagree with you. There are times where stakeholders, you're going to have disagreements with your stakeholders. So it's very important that you think about how do we reach agreements on key decisions with our stakeholders? How do we ensure that we, as an organization, we are on the same page with some of our stakeholders on a particular project that we are working with? And so part of your stakeholder engagement would be how to negotiate and how to have the right partnerships in your communities, partnerships with other CSOs, partnerships with your community-based organizations. So it's very, very important that you know how to negotiate and you don't leave your negotiating table and not reaching an agreement. So in order for you to negotiate effectively, you need to understand when you should negotiate. So you need to understand when the need for negotiation comes. So there are going to be times where you need to negotiate with stakeholders. There are going to be times where you will not need to negotiate with stakeholders. But every time where you need to get into agreement with certain stakeholders, you will need to know how to negotiate with them. There are times whereby you want to even construct a borehole for them, but there are going to be disagreements within that community as to where the right spot should be, as to who owns the land, as to whose family own that particular land. We've had those kind of issues whereby you're trying to even construct a school block for communities, and they will tell you, some family members will come up and say, it is not the community that owned that section of the land, that it was their great-great-grandfather that owned that land. And so the communities do not have a right or a stake to that particular property where you're trying to use to build or construct this school or this classroom or this borehole or this facility that will be used by everybody. So it's very important that you think about that to say, when do we need to negotiate? Because if you do not know when you need to negotiate, you will not learn how to negotiate. So negotiating skills is an important skill that as a CSO, as development professionals, we need to have, because every day in our project or regularly in our project, we're going to have instances where we need to know how to negotiate with stakeholders. So in order for you to negotiate it effectively, the second thing you need to consider is that you need to negotiate in good faith. So you need to carry out your negotiation in an open mind and have a willingness to engage in the negotiating process and a willingness to reach an agreement, not a desire for you to win and another person lose. So we're talking about a win-win agreement. So you must be able to reach a win-win agreement. And one of the things that you need to do in this process is that always involve the legitimate representatives of these stakeholders. Don't just go to committees and negotiate agreements with people who are not qualified, who are not really representing women, who are not really representing youth. So you need to ask the people to say, who are the people, who are your representatives? Which individuals can speak on your behalf? Which group of persons can speak on your behalf? And your negotiation should be free from coercion or intimidation. Don't go and intimidate the communities to say, okay, if you don't give us the land, you will be here and you will die in poverty. If you don't give us the land, be here and cholera or diarrhea will finish you. Don't you know, is it not for your own good? Am I the one who is going to be drinking water from this borehole? No. Don't blackmail people don't coerce people to negotiate with you. And it's always important to have like a joint committee for, between your team and the other stakeholders, for you to really look at the issues where the disagreements are and find solutions together. And let there be equal access to information. Don't be the one who sees all the picture, who has all the information, and the other stakeholders do not have access to any information. And another thing is that we need to use participatory approaches. Let us avoid the methods of dictating to community members, of telling them, just go, what we've already taken decisions in our offices. We'll just go to communities and just begin to just tell them, this is what we decided, and this is what is good for you. If you're not interested in this, then you can leave it. No, that is not right. And as much as possible, you need to provide sufficient time for people to take decisions. And the next thing that you also need to consider when negotiating is you need to choose a style of negotiation that is likely to build relationships. Now, there are some negotiation techniques or styles that you use, and even though an agreement is reached, you will never have a relationship with those people again. People will not see eye to eye. You're quarreling with them. You can never be in the same room again. You're feeling that they used you, or they feel that you used them, or that you bully them, into reaching agreement. So we're saying that always have an interest-based approach, whereby you're putting people's interests first before your own. Okay, so you're ensuring that the interest of everybody who is negotiating, who is on the negotiating table, is reached, not the one that you are hiding your own benefits in one corner, and people do not know that as they're negotiating with you, they are selling their rights to you as an organization. So it's very important that you ensure that everybody's interest is known and their interests are considered. So let's always try to use a win-win approach during our negotiation with our stakeholders. And we also need to negotiate strategic partnerships. Strategic partnerships are very critical. That during negotiation, we should try to build partnerships with communities, try to build partnerships with our stakeholders, okay? We shouldn't see people as enemies in the process of negotiating with them, but we should see them as partners, as joint partners that we're working together towards a particular goal. Because you need other people. Without the right partnerships, your project is not going to succeed. Without the right partnerships, you're not going to get the kind of results that you want to get on that project. Do we have any questions regarding this particular topic? With regards to negotiation, do we have any example? Is there anybody with an example, a case study, something that happened, or a way that you had an issue on your project? How did you negotiate your way around it, and how, what method did you use? All right, Duke, you can unmute yourself, sir.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much.
Thanks, sir.
We were working in Jigawa State.
Yes.
On family planning and child spacing.
Yeah.
And an aspect of the project was using local midwives to go into homes.
Yes.
To educate the women. So we assumed that having access to the women through these local midwives will bring the women out when we get to the communities.
Yes.
But we didn't know that getting the women out is a completely different ball game.
Yeah.
So when we got there, we spent hours, and the town criers spent 3 hours going around the community, trying to get the women to come out of their houses to participate in the project. And after 3 hours, we didn't make any headway. That was when we now realized that we had to negotiate with the traditional ruler and the religious leaders to prevail on the men to allow the women to come out. And sometimes the negotiation will take more than 1 hour. But the strategy that we used was to analyze the challenge that the community was facing with them, try to get them to understand. Try to get them to understand how the role of women is key in solving the problems and the benefits the community would gain by allowing the women to participate in the project. Then sometimes too, after you have succeeded in getting them to agree to allow the women to come, the next challenge will be, even if the women come out, which part of the stage or the arena will they stay? That negotiation will still take another maybe 15 or 30 minutes to agree on a particular position for the women to stay. So we now realize what we took away from that
I've lost you. Hello, Mr. Duke. We seem to have lost you.
You must understand culture, understand how across the country.
I think I can't hear you again. Am I the only one who can't see? Okay. All right. So Adiola, you can. Adiola, just go ahead.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to share experience in light of the 5th point that was raised that says negotiate to create strategic partnership. I work in the field of literacy with public schools across the country. Now, we found out that we needed Subel to help us run this project. And one thing that we did was when we started from the word go, even during the project design, we engaged with Subeb and with UBEC in Abuja. And this project has run for about 6 years running now. And for each stage, we've never had issues. Even when our partners could not fund the project anymore because of COVID and economic downturn and all, and we had just a mini version of the project, the Subeb desk officers were willing to do things for us for free, as against the initial years of us having to give them some stipend to carry out the activities. So it is actually very important to create, like you said, don't create partnerships so that you're no longer in the same room, you can no longer work together just for one piece of a project and then the project ends. We must ensure that we are able to create partnerships that will work, because you don't need them initially just for one project. It's depending on what the thematic focus of your organization is. You may need them over and over and over in different projects. So it is important for us to create that partnership. In fact, it's for some of the states, the desk officers have been changed over and over. Once one person is going, they automatically inform us, please, I am leaving. And most times they even link us up with a new person, allow us to orientate this new person. And even though this new person is somebody, so there are some desk officers I've never seen. Some of them is just on the phone that we've spoken. But this partnership has helped the project run effectively for the past 6 years. So that's just my own contribution to it.
Thank you so much for bringing that out. Thank you. Thank you. All right, so we'll just okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
All right, thank you, Mr. Vincent.
Yes.
I just want to share my own experience. This issue of Child Right Act and VAP law.
Yeah.
When we were advocating for the passage, we sent it, we went to the government house, and it was sent to the House of Assembly as an executive bill. But we now realized and discovered that, in the note, issue of early girl child marriage is not a law.
Yeah.
So, and it was in the Child Right Act, another issue that had to relate with the women and other things. So we now discovered that the Islamic, religious leaders,
Yeah.
and the community leaders, they are the ones that are holding the VAP law back. So we started looking for a way, how are we going to have a dialogue with them and negotiate and see how we can sit down and deliberate on it and bring it out. So it was taking longer than necessary. So we have to find a way of bringing the religious leaders together, take them to, from Kebbi, we take them to Sokoto and have an engagement meeting with them. We went through the laws with them,
Yeah.
bit by bit, and I discussed all the issues and did a lot of negotiation. I had to take them away from the state completely so that there was no distraction.
Yeah.
And also after then, we now also take the members of the House of the committees on women affairs and other health issues. We also take some of them also to another place and also engage with them and discuss a lot of deliberation. And after they came back again, it was, they agreed then, but after they came back also, there are other opinions because some of them that were not part of it, they were not part of the negotiation meeting that we had engaged with them.
Yeah.
When they came back down now to sit down and deliberate and finalize it, some people have started bringing their own opinions again. So it was again dragging. So we now discover there are some of them that are the people that are like standing in between us and them negotiating. We have some lawyers that are also part of the technical working group for GBV in the state. So they are like our informant. So we now say, okay, what we do is we use them through them so that they will go and help so that they were able to sit with them. A lot of consultative meetings here and there, even engaging some people opinion, bringing opinion from the local government, from the community. Before at the end of the day, thank God, about 3 weeks ago now, all the bills were passed. But it was really a hectic and a long process because it is after you have come to the roundtable discourse, by the time they go back to relate the message to the larger community there, you will see other people are still bringing their own opinion and there will be a lot of delay and disengagement. But after a lot of engagement, discussion, negotiation, finally, thank God, the bill has been passed, both the VAP law and the Child Right Act law. So that's our little experience here in Kebbi State.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, madam, for sharing. Now, yeah, so all these things, it's very important as we begin to wrap up. The take home should be that stakeholder engagement is critical and different stakeholders will require different techniques that you want to use to engage them. So the essence of sharing this is you need to realize that one, it's not a one-time thing that you do. You need to constantly engage them, constantly remind them. Human beings change position. We do change position, based on certain situations that will find yourself, you just find out that you're no more on that position where you were standing before. But the last thing I want to talk about today is that grievance management. How do you manage grievances and complaints within a particular project and a particular organization or a particular stakeholder? As you negotiate with people, as you go out to carry out projects, there are people who are going to be aggrieved. There are people who are going to feel that they are going to have issues with you, with your team, with your volunteers, with themselves. And so you need to have in place a mechanism. Today, as part of the accountability requirements, every organization should have a complaints handling mechanism, either a complaint and feed a complaints response mechanism or a complaints response channels with which you're able to collect information, grievances, and complaints from community members, especially people that are affected, the affected population. It's really important that you think about, do we have a process? So yeah, you have to begin to think about your process of grievance management. Do we have the right process, okay, whereby people who are affected have their, can share their complaints and they have those complaints resolved. So every organization needs to have a CRM, a complaint response mechanism, a process of lodging complaints, a process of reviewing those complaints, and a process of resolving those complaints. And that process has to be transparent. People need to know that they have to have that perception that you are very transparent in the way you deal with their complaints. It's very, very important. And different projects would have different complaint response mechanisms or different grievances or complaint channels. Okay, some large projects, you may have different channels, very may require some very formal process of lodging complaints, but small projects within a community, you may say, okay, we'll be having maybe a community meeting whereby community members will be allowed to share their grievances, or we may have a community liaison officer who will be collecting complaints from community members and share it to us, or we are going to be providing suggestion boxes at strategic locations for community members to share their grievances. But it's very important that as part of your stakeholder engagement approach that you're using, that you have channels with which feedback and complaints regarding you, regarding your projects, regarding the way your partners, consultants or contractors are treating beneficiaries or affected population, and that those affected people can lodge those complaints and see that the complaints have been resolved by you. Now, if you do have them, because some people do have these channels, so the next question will be, how visible and are the community members even aware that you have these complaints or grievance response mechanisms in place? Do your staff even know that there is a policy for complaints handling in the organization? Because you should also have a policy that talks about how you would handle complaints or grievances from committee members and other stakeholders, and also how do you handle the grievances and complaints of your staff and volunteers. So there should be a policy whereby that talks about how complaints are addressed. And no matter how robust your complaints response mechanisms are, it is useless if nobody knows that it exists. And so it's very important that you also you document it. And you need to make these channels accessible. You need to make it very easy for people to lodge complaints in your organization. You need to always go out and request for complaints. Some of you say, okay, sometimes I talk to organizations, they tell you we have a toll-free line, but nobody has called. If nobody has called you, or if nobody has dropped any complaint in your suggestion boxes, it doesn't mean that there are no grievances or there are no issues, but it just means that maybe that channel is not the appropriate channel for the people. So you will need to discuss with them about what is the best channel that they would like to use to share their complaints or to air their grievances to you on that particular project. And so it's very important that you make those channels accessible for people. If you're putting suggestion boxes, make it, place it in positions that people can actually reach them and use them. And also, you need to develop appropriate response time. How long do you respond to the complaints of people? How many minutes, how many hours, how many days will it take you to respond to issues? Because some of us are we receive complaints, but we don't respond to them. It takes us a lot of time to reply to our emails. It takes us a lot of time to return a phone call. It takes us a lot of time to respond to our social media channels. Maybe you're receiving complaints on Facebook, but you don't respond to them. People send you an email from your website, you don't respond to those emails. So that means that your response time is slow, and then you're not very transparent in the way you deal with these issues. So it's very important that as part of your stakeholder engagement process, you need to have in place mechanisms whereby people can air their grievances and people can make complaints on that particular project. And so this is where I'll be stopping for today. So if you have any questions, any comments, any observations, you can just unmute yourself. So I've asked everybody to unmute. You can go ahead and unmute the mic, unmute your mic, and then if you want to contribute, the floor is now open for general contributions. Yeah, Gloria, your mic is on.
Okay. When she finishes, then I'll come on, please.
Is there any thoughts, any comments, any questions that we have?
Yeah, I have comments.
Okay, please go ahead.
Just to say that this particular class, is quite interesting.
Thank
For
you.
me, I have learned.
Okay, just finish. Please go ahead. Sorry.
Even though we had a case where we needed to share stories about persons living with HIV and AIDS, using their voices, we learned that early that it's important to hide their identity, and we tried to do that. But from the stories and the the teachings of today, it has dawned on me more that it's really very critical to protect people's just to ensure that we do not expose our partners and our beneficiaries.
It's very important
for me. Yes. And I've learned quite a lot, and I'm happy that I'm in this master class because it's helping me, and my staff, to grow. Looking at stakeholder consultation, it comes off and on when we're about to do projects, because you need to consult your beneficiaries, talk with them, ensure that it is what they want, be sure you're talking to the right people, So thank you very much, Vincent.
All right, thank you so much, madam. I appreciate the kind feedback. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Vincent. Thank you very much. This is another educative session. It's really wonderful and interesting, and I can also relate